Welcome to the podcast.
We're here.
We're here. We're live, in person, recorded for your viewing pleasure. You're on YouTube. You can see us, adjusting and
Doing all the things.
yawning and, wiping our nose and all the fun things in our podcast. So if you've never watched on YouTube, I encourage you to go do that.
You're really missing out on the nose
You're
wiping.
missing out on Joellen dozing off when I get into a soliloquy. Yeah, good times.
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, July, freedom.
Yeah, we're here to talk about obviously freedom.
What
a surprise.
I threw the ball over to her and she
What a
didn't.
surprise. I didn't come prepared to catch the ball. But here we are, I have it anyway. We're gonna talk about freedom. We're gonna start off defining just kind of like, what is freedom? What do we mean? Because people mean different things when they talk about stuff.
Well, there's
And-
different kinds
yeah,
too, right? So
Different kinds adds more definitions, which is fun.
Yeah.
And we're talking about freedom versus obligation a little bit as well. Because like it's kind of the opposite. So we kind of like to compare, like, okay, if you're not free, what does that mean you're experiencing? Could be obligation, duty.
Mm-hmm.
I know there were some other words that you came up with. I just can't remember them. But
responsibility.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's start talking about just kind of like setting the foundation, right? The groundwork for going forward, because if we're not at least in the same realm, speaking the same lingity. What is that movie from? Okay, folks, I haven't slept well in a while, and
Welcome to the club.
You might get a little goofy version of me this month. I don't know. Anyway, so yeah, freedom. So let's talk about, there's different kinds of freedom. So we were talking about emotional freedom, financial freedom, political freedom, relational freedom, like in your relationships, how free are you feeling? And then spiritual freedom. And since we're a heavily spiritually minded podcast, that's where we will land, I'm sure. But I feel like even some of those other ones tie into, or like, on the topic of spiritual freedom, your emotions have a ton to do with, where you're at spiritually, or where you're at spiritually have a ton to do with your emotional state. Like, sometimes it's hard to know what comes first, chicken or egg,
And then in comes your relationships, and you're like, oh,
yeah,
there's
and
even more,
right? And then you're in a relationship with someone, whether it be a family member or like significant other or whatever, and there's like all this different dynamic, and what are we free to do, especially I feel like with a spouse, like, you definitely have responsibilities, expectations. I don't know if I want to say you have duties. I don't want to say that, but like we'll explore that, like, sure, hey, do we really have duties to our spouse, and in relationships, and I was thinking about this idea about even just as a society, like, how do we have, like, we have a responsibility to one another, because especially if we come from the perspective of like we're all one, which I do, then you are me and I am you. So I feel like that's kind of where Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah, an act of self-love is loving your neighbor.
Yeah, and like, so loving myself better means I am loving my neighbor better, but loving my neighbor better also means I'm loving myself better.
Yeah, it goes both ways.
So like thinking about our responsibility to one another, like I just really want to pull apart and kind of figure out, where's that line, right? Like, where's the line where, because if you read the definition of freedom, why don't you go ahead and do that?
It is the power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint.
So the power to like basically do whatever I want without being hindered or held back, right? So I have, like, it makes me think of free will.
Yeah, like you have the right to choose of like which path you're going to take, what choice you're going to make,
Mm-hmm.
all the different things. It's funny because this definition almost sounds scary to me. It's like you can do whatever you want. And I think of like a kid set loose in a candy store. And I'm like, oh, shoot. Like, that's scary, but it's also like exciting. I think it depends on the heart that you're leading out of. Because I know we've talked about kind of two main emotions being love and fear. And if you're leading out of a heart of fear, I think freedom can be scary. It's like, what do I do? Like for someone who's maybe moving out for the first time, there's a lot of scary freedoms of like you really can choose whatever you want. Or you're leading out of a heart of love. You've probably spent some time being free and you're probably a little more well seasoned and like maybe not, I don't know, but and knowing like how to manage your freedom wisely. Because I think freedom can be a negative thing if not cared for in a heart of love. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does. And it makes me think about a lot of different things. That's why it takes me so long to answer, because I'm like, oh my gosh, I have like 10 new strands of thought.
You're welcome.
I guess at the heart of life, I'm a philosopher in a lot of ways. I think that's why people get irritated with me on Facebook, because like really we'll have like comment threads that went on for days and they're like, I did not want that. Like it's exhausting for people, I think. Anyways, that's why it's such a good podcast fit. Such a good fit for the podcast. Anyway, yeah. So freedom. So there was something that you said about a 2-year-old in a candy store cannot manage their own freedoms.
Yeah.
Say their parents aren't there. They're just alone in this candy store.
They're like, woo, running around ripping candy out of stuff. That's what my mind sees.
Yeah. There's danger there because there's no sense of maturity. There's no sense of responsibility. I mean, they are responsible for their own choices, right? But they aren't maybe going to act responsibly, knowing, because a 2-year-old in a candy store doesn't know.
I'm gonna throw up if I eat all of this.
That if they go to town on everything in the store, they're gonna feel sick, right? Yeah. They don't know that in advance, so they have to like take that leap, do that thing in order to learn that that's what happens. Like natural consequence. So they have to do the thing unless they have a parent there that says, no, you can't do that. I'm not going to let you do that because I know what the consequence will be of that.
So it's like, unless there's like a teaching presence, like a leading presence. Yeah.
Some other force outside one's own self. And so it kind of makes me think about how I've kind of been on this journey of deconstructing creation and reconstructing creation, and thinking about there's a great book called Creative Chaos by Andrew Rabe. I'm not sure if he pronounces it Rabe or Rabe. It's like Rabe with like a little tilde on the E.
Is that what those are called?
Tilde. Creative Chaos, and he goes into Genesis and he talks about 1, 2, and 3, and how the Jewish scriptures, like the Old Testament, was written much later than many other civilizations' creation histories. Like every civilization has its own sort of written story of creation, and they're remarkably similar. And he's talking about how first of all, Genesis 2 and 3 were written first. Genesis 1 was actually written later. And they inserted it first to sort of like
kind of seem chronological,
set the stage a little bit and sort of summarize. So like Genesis 1 is more of kind of like this summary of creation. And then it kind of goes back a little, like goes back in chapter 2, it kind of goes back to the beginning and gets like more detailed. But the Christian Bible or whatever, this section of scripture is actually much younger than other cultures. Scriptures or stories, yeah. And there are so many similarities between, just the gods or gods, humans, gardens, snakes, apples.
Wow.
Like there are, I never knew this in my Christian bubble. I never knew that even existed. So it's a really fascinating book, and I encourage people to go read it. But where this intersects with our conversation is with this 2-year-old in the candy store.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much like the beginning of humankind. So they are given a couple of trees in front of them, and God's like, don't eat from that tree over there because bad things will happen. But they didn't have the maturity. They didn't have the life experience
to
know what would happen. And so they ate the candy in the candy store. And then all of a sudden they knew the pain of getting sick on the candy. In a sense, you know what I'm saying? If we're kind of overlapping it with our kid in the candy store. So yeah, so this idea of freedom, of like, were Adam and Eve free to make the choice? I mean, they did, obviously, even though God told them not to. So like, I'm thinking about the kid in the candy store. If there was a parent in the candy store and the parent was like, okay, I'm going to advise you not to do that, but I'm still going to let you have the ability to choose. So they still had the freedom to do it.
They would still definitely do it, yeah.
The kid would do it.
Yeah.
And so would humanity. And the good mother or father, I guess, would take the child home and care for them when they were throwing up and, all the things. They wouldn't be like, you suck. Well, now I've created this room over here where you're going to get spankings for all of eternity because you made a bad choice. So like, I'm getting into hell now, but like, let's not go there. That's a different podcast. But yeah, so humanity has the freedom to choose,
but it's not a place of like eternal damnation. And I think that is where this place of fear comes from, at least from me personally, because it's from this Christian bubble that I've lived in of like, oh no, I'm so free. What if I mess up? What if you mess up? Oh no, it's not like there's a God of love waiting to rescue you at every turn and be like, I love you so much.
Yeah.
Like at every turn.
Yeah, like imagine the mother just walked out like, well, screw you then, kid.
Yeah.
You're not going to take my advice. You're not going to listen to me. Peace. I'm out.
Yeah. You're not my kid anymore.
Like that would never happen, right?
Yeah.
So why would God do that? Why would God turn his back when we sin?
If God is the perfect parent and the perfect lover of our soul, is part of our soul, I wonder if, like, I don't think this is going to pan out to make sense, but I know God came down to earth as Jesus to like be part of this humanity, but we are also built of the stuff of Jesus. So he never stopped living that humanity. Like I know that people talk about like how Jesus endured every temptation while he was on earth, like those 40 days in the desert, to understand how we feel. But and like how he's, gone through whatever. But I always had the thought in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, Jesus never had sex. Like
that we know of.
It's like, man, he's missing out.
Oh, some traditional Christians are unsubscribing now. They're like, that we know of. You guys are nuts. I'm out of here.
I was thinking, I was like, wait, if I'm into the stuff of Jesus, he's not missing out. Not to sound weird, but like
Oh, so you mean like he's experiencing it through you because you're made of
through all of
okay,
us.
okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Because, oh, I don't, yeah, I've laid this out really weird. Yes, Jesus has gone through all the things. I would say even more so because he's part of the stuff of us.
That's a really interesting thought, and it gets into a very deep quantum physics realm.
I could really open up a
But it
big can of worms right now.
really, yeah, for sure. It's a really interesting thing, and I want you to write it down because I have encountered some women actually in a few of my circles who who think that they can't, or that Jesus can't really relate to them because he's not a woman.
Yep.
Like he did not experience the cultural things that women experienced of his day.
They were property back then.
He did not, have to be like he was never, that we know, like he was never raped or like sexually abused or those kinds of things.
Never had a period.
So I know women who have a sense of disconnect between themselves and the person of Jesus because he doesn't know.
Yeah.
In their words, he doesn't know everything. He hasn't experienced everything I have. And so your words there are actually very profound because it's like, oh, we are all like in this. That's why I said it kind of pertains to quantum physics a lot, because if we're talking about if the Trinity, God, Spirit, Jesus, are the same thing, if they are the quantum field, and humanity, everything like that is potential, is possible, lives there first. So every human, everything that has been created or ever will be created has come through and is made of the stuff of the quantum field. That means exactly what you said.
Yeah.
That Jesus is us and he is experiencing us like quite literally. And that's like, oh, next level. But is it freedom, obligation, duty, and responsibility? Do we digress?
Jesus is definitely, if that's true though, that means that Jesus has experienced, like, I think there's a lot of stigma that we've talked about here before about like how women have this duty in the family. I know we talked about like in our love month. I think about Gma of just like how she kind of had this wifely duty that she lived with, and Jesus would have then experienced that through women. Jesus would have experienced even the not even just like, oh, the freedom of sex, like that's great, but Jesus has also experienced the pain of a period, the pain of childbirth, which I learned about recently. I just talked about that, but like, you know how like they talk about the curse of childbirth? This mistranslated. Anyway.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Talking about, I think it's talking about like the sadness of infertility and like miscarrying and stuff. Anyway, other stuff. But
yeah, Jesus has felt and experienced all of that. Quite real.
Yeah.
In a quite real way, not just emotionally.
Yeah. But lived through us.
As he lives through us. He's actually, wow, that's pretty intense.
I'm just processing, sorry.
Oh my gosh, so am I.
This is so good. I'm just thinking about
fast.
Yeah, it did. Oh, the person of Jesus may not have experienced all the things that like his body may not have experienced, but now his spirit can through everything through us in our bodies.
Well, I've even heard of and read some theologians who, because Jesus's physical body ascended, that there is still a physical body.
Where?
Yeah, good question.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I'm not saying I believe that necessarily, but some people
It's a cool idea.
Yeah, it's interesting. My mind is reeling with all this quantum physics stuff that I've been learning. Cool. Okay. Anyways, so that that brings up then this idea for me to define what is obligation then, because if we are connected like that with Jesus and he is experiencing everything that we are experiencing, then we are, by our own freedom to choose, we are putting something on him that he may or may not have chosen.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, like, is that messing with his quote freedom?
Is he under obligation to then experience whatever we've chosen?
Yeah. So does Jesus have an obligation to sit with us in our pile of garbage? And what does that say about freedom? Because, like, if the definition of freedom is, to be unhindered, but if that's not what he wanted, I guess that would make it mean that that is what he wants.
Mm-hmm. Because I mean, I've been thinking a lot about why God created us lately, because I don't know, it didn't add up to me that God would create a race of people that he knew would not always choose like a specific religion or a specific way of believing in him, and that they would choose to eat this fruit that he told them not to eat. Like, I don't know, in my mind, I guess it was, people can believe differently, but I was taught that he knew beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's outside of time, then he would have seen that already.
Mm-hmm.
So like this was no surprise.
Right.
And he wasn't like, oh crap.
Yeah. Oh shit, what do I do now?
I didn't think that was gonna happen. Oh my gosh. But like, because he's seen that, in my mind, like, this is a really bad representation, but it's almost like God creating an amusement park for himself by creating humanity. That's really surface level and that's not all of it, but like by doing that, God has more or less created a way for him to do a little bit of everything and create, like, there's gonna be some really high highs where you're like at the top of the roller coaster, you're like, oh, this is so fun. Also some really low lows. And like, you might be throwing up on the side of the roller coaster because you've eaten too much cotton candy. Like,
or you went into the public restroom and there's no toilet paper.
Exactly. Oh, that's real. That is so real. Too many times.
It's the worst experience at the park for me.
And so, like, I guess in my mind, God knew what he was signing up for. And if he didn't want it, then that sucks because it's here and he's living it and we're living it. And I guess I'd be really surprised if he knew ahead of time like what he was signing up for and was like, I don't really want that. I'll do it anyway. Yeah. So yeah, I would assume that that is something that God wants and he's willing to accept all the good and the bad. I mean, the other things that he's created are like angels and they're covered in eyeballs and they I mean, that's a biblical thing right there. It sounds creepy and I would like to see them myself to actually see how.
Okay, but maybe that's metaphorical.
Maybe it is. But since they're covered in eyeballs, that's an interesting friend to have around. And I still need to like dive into whether they have choice or not, because like a third of them did leave, is what the Bible says. So like they did choose to leave, but kind of the rest of the angels, they're just kind of spending eternity like being around, praising all the things of Jesus. So I personally like could understand like, oh, let's try something new. Let's create time, create this sense of experience that he's never had before. I don't know that God is able to live through angels, but he for sure lives in the stuff of us because we are the stuff of him. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's a free obligation. I mean, when you sign up for something like ziplining, it's freeing because you're flying through the air, but you're obligated to follow the safety guidelines. You have to, or else you could die. So yeah, I guess that's kind of how I view it. Like there's a balance there. God is probably more or less obligated to kind of do the things that we choose to do. But I think there's also I signed up for this. I'm here for the whole ride because I'm so full of love, because I'm so full of this abundance. I'm here for everything. And it's worth it. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, and I'm thinking like is he still then operating in freedom because he chose to obligate himself?
Mm.
He chose to, like Jesus, when Jesus came to the planet and did all the things he did, he yeah, just how like he kind of foreknew that there would be ups and downs, and like he signed up for it. He's like, "Yep, I'm in. I'm all in. I'll go to the park. I'll throw up with you. I'll go to the bathroom with no toilet paper that has not been cleaned in 6 hours and has seen 500 park visitors."
Yeah.
And so that kind of leads me to think about, so it's actually making me think about this comment that someone made. Because, per usual, I put stuff out on Facebook as I'm thinking about the next month, and I just kind of test the waters and kind of see what people are thinking, how they're feeling, and then if, other people are making comments that make me think about our topic, which happened here recently, and somebody asked a question, what is duty and where does duty come from?
Mm.
There was a little bit of back and forth, very little bit, because I think I've exhausted this person. But anyways, the comment was made that God is the only free being,
That's so
and
sad.
our freedom is borrowed from him.
Hmm.
And so any freedom we experience, because it's borrowed, we then have certain duties or obligations or responsibilities to him because we're borrowing that freedom from him.
Hmm.
Yeah, it made me think, like, it was a really great interaction, because I was just like, oh wow, that brings up new thoughts and
Right.
new things, like, because, and I said, I that's interesting, because I would have thought we as humans are perhaps more free than God,
Yeah.
because if I believe that God is love, that he in his essence is pure love, can he be anything else that's
Mm.
not love? And so there's no choice, like he cannot choose hate because that's outside the essence and nature of love.
Right.
But if we go back to what you were saying earlier about how, because we are made of the same stuff as Jesus, he's perhaps living and experiencing another dimension of his own being through in and through us.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, he is experiencing hate. He is experiencing, but he's not choosing those things.
Mm-hmm.
Unless he is, because like it gets into this whole philosophical sort of like
Kind of a maze.
hamster wheel kind of thing,
Yeah.
like chicken and egg scenario again. And I had made that comment in the tacos group about, is freedom and duty sort of the same thing? Is it chicken and egg? Like,
Mm.
am I free to choose to obligate myself to my neighbor?
Mm-hmm.
But then once I obligate myself to my neighbor, have I suspended my freedom?
Mm.
Or am I still free to withdraw that obligation and withdraw that sense of duty? And what repercussions does that have? So, like, I'm just kind of thinking about our relationship as humans, like
Yeah.
human to human now. And like, okay, let's forget the human to God one and look at like the human to human,
Yeah.
because God, you might say, commanded us to love our neighbor as ourself. And so I don't like that word command anymore. I feel like I'm reconstructing that word too, but I don't know. Like, to me, in my mind, because we're made through Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and he obligated himself to us. It's part of our being. It's part of our DNA to be at least connected to one another. I don't feel like we can escape the connection that we have as humans.
Right. We'll always be linked.
Yeah, like we're always linked because we're made of the same stuff, even though we're unique expressions of the stuff. We're still linked, and we're still like at a foundational level made of the same. Thanks for joining us on the Becoming Home podcast, where we're talking about freedom here in July. Don't forget, you can run over to buymeacoffee.com/the Becoming Home podcast to buy us a coffee. Come back next week. We're going to be unpacking how religion misdefined freedom and actually created quite a bit of trauma that Joellen and I have been unpacking and rethinking and deconstructing. Come back for that. We'll see you then.